Welcome to Chicago, a modern city with life and character, life that seeks to bloom. But it's choked, kept in line by a firm hand around its neck. You step out of line, they're always watching. And they don't forget. They don't take anyone trying to break free from the grip lightly. Aiden Pierce was a fixer, a fancy word for a handyman who'd be better suited to cleaning blood off the floor than putting up a set of shelves. You got a problem? He's who you call. And someone did. Aiden and his partner, Damien Branks, were to siphon money from the fat cats at the Merlot Hotel. But they were discovered, and there was something far more valuable at the hotel than money. Something that the owner, mob boss Lucky Quinn, would stop at nothing to protect. Fixers were hired to fix the fixer. It was Maurice Vega who tailed Aiden into a tunnel with his niece in the back of the car. And it was only meant as a warning shot, but the car lost control, rolled, with Lena Pierce, only 5 years old, killed in the wreckage. Aiden is as responsible for killing Lena as Vega, and if guilt is the soul's call to action, then Aiden was hell-bent. Someone, anyone, was going to pay. "11 months later, there's nothing but dead bodies between Aiden and Maurice, but he's just a hired gun. Aiden doesn't know why the Merlot job failed or who ordered the attack. Maurice is just the beginning, and appropriately, the beginning of Watch Dogs. You see, Aiden would have had no problems if he were only using a VPN. NordVPN, for example. Since I am an untraceable genius-level hacker god, I have been for about a year on 3 separate computers. If you too are in the market for something that can almost instantly change your online location and keep your presence safe from prying eyes, you can get 70%, that's a 7 with a 0 on the end, off a 3-year plan by using offer code Whitelight and the affiliate link in the description. If Aiden had just used NordVPN, Lena might have rolled up to Pawnee in a slightly more stylish sense. Well, you can't change the past. Geordie has agreed to keep a hold of Maurice until we figure out what to do with him. For most of us players, it wasn't until now that something seemed wrong. We just blacked out an entire football stadium using our phone. That was awesome. But this isn't right. Why does Chicago look different? This isn't the Chicago that we were sold. Nothing is as detailed, the lighting is night and day in more ways than one, there are no such wind effects, no cans blown along the street. The E3 gameplay was a demo that for all we know might have not even been run in real time, designed especially to show off what Next Gen could do. And what Next Gen could in fact do was nothing of the sort. Everything you see was downgraded for the final release, and so we have the first knife in Watch Dogs' gut: lies. Night and day is frankly an understatement, but disappointment inevitably warps people's perception of things. It's very easy to substitute disappointing for bad, and it's very easy to substitute bad for terrible. Dark Souls 2, anyone? It's a predisposition that upon revisiting the game today, I didn't have. Watch Dogs doesn't look last gen. The Windy City is beautiful. For a map that's vastly smaller than the likes of GTA, the range of environments is remarkable. Low-cost housing in the wards, the sick outskirt town where people go to escape the city, Pawnee, and the bustling modern city centre, the Loop. It's a beautiful skyline, and I loved seeing it from all these different perspectives. There's something horrifying about looking up at skyscrapers from a slum underneath the highway. And it's that dense variety that keeps the environments consistently fresh throughout the campaign. I always get the Windy City and the Rainy City confused, but this game could have fooled me. Ubisoft nailed the rain in this game as much as every other time of day. Rain comes with that slight haze. The afternoon sun beams down through the environment believably, and the lights of the city all feel very lifelike at night, which creates an incredibly effective contrast with when you knock those lights out. I don't know what it is about rain in a city that feels so relaxing. Perhaps the satisfaction that you're completely unaffected by a natural hazard and you didn't even have to lift a finger. Or that even when it seems like the difference between governments and God is smaller than ever, nature still finds a way to piss on us. Perspective makes all the difference for immersion, which is actually why I enjoy the L train so much. The L train is an example of how the smallest details can make the largest differences. I remember in 2014, a couple months before Watch Dogs dropped, I was blown away by infamous Second Son, and there was one detail that stood out to me. It was the train. It moved. You can stand on top of it. This is true next-gen. The L train had an even stronger effect. What do you and I do in a city on a day-to-day basis? We travel, we work, and we eat. Most of the buildings we see mean very little, they're no more than a setting. So, a video game realizing a vast chunk of what a city is to us, public transport, is an immensely immersive touch. The mere perspective of a train window makes a virtual city feel that much more real. But it's the people that make it feel alive. Thanks to your Hacker Man superpowers, you're given the names, job titles, income, and dirty secrets of everyone in the city. A guy isn't just a guy, he may be a foot fetishist furry working as a janitor. That gives people a level of personality you're just not going to get anywhere else. But even beyond it, you'll find people kissing, you'll find people rapping, you'll find friends gossiping, you'll find friends arguing. There's a homeless population, there's people doing yoga. That's how you make a virtual city feel real. If the people believe it, then you will too. Watch Dogs is only matched by its sequel in this respect, so what else is there to say but well done? Ubisoft have never had difficulty with making a place feel lived in. They've just had difficulty making you want to live in it. You know, for all their flaws, I don't think towers on a map are always an awful way of doing things. I like the idea of having to scout out an area first before you magically know the exact location of everything in it. And I never thought towers were all that boring. The sense of vertigo in something like Far Cry 3 or 4 was quite unique. But in Watch Dogs, as we can see, it's not quite the same. It's a rooftop. Well, that's not really quite as good. Surprisingly, you don't need to do any of them to fill up most of the map. Much of it reveals automatically or from profiling. Would you just look at how many side missions there are? I bet pressing Ctrl-C and Ctrl-V all those times must have taken Ubisoft ages. And there you have the second knife. None of this was new. This wasn't next-gen, this was just the same thing with a prettier face. We realized here that not only would this be more of the same, but so would the next generation of gaming. It wasn't the prettier face that made people instantly pre-order Watch Dogs though, it was that sexy USP. You're a hacker god and the city is under your control. It's no surprise that a concept decidedly modern and techy would sell the idea of next-gen so well. That's what's really different about this Chicago. That's the hand gripping its throat. CTOS, the Central Operation System. An entire city wired up to one central network. When a camera can recognize faces, what's the difference between it and an eyeball? There are 1,000 eyes on you. In your house, in your workplace, in your car, on every building and every street. It knows who your friends are. It knows who your rivals are. It controls your car's locking mechanism, the traffic flow, the public transport, the water, the gas, the electricity, the money, your front gate. Blom knows everything about you and has strings on every aspect of your life. They say it's for your safety. We know better than that. Blom wants money and Blom wants power, which means whether or not CTOS is impenetrable is irrelevant to them. And so we have the Watch Dogs. Hackers inside the system. If the system is everything, then a hacker is like a god. I always wondered why the name Watch Dogs, but it seems clear to me now. It's just a gritty way of saying guardian, or in this case, vigilante. Most stories about a vigilante are comic books and shows where the main character fights like Kung Fu Panda and has a billion-dollar bank account backing them up. But who needs any of that when you control the world itself? CTOS made hacking a superpower. The cameras are your eyes now. Thanks to the constant tracking of every citizen in Chicago, the element of surprise is always your own. Pipes can be burst to stun enemies, electrical boxes can be detonated to kill them. Things get more complex when you take to the streets. You can hack yourself into a parking garage, then black out CTOS to prevent your pursuers from following. You can detonate steam pipes underneath enemy vehicles, or use traffic, blockers and spikes to a similar effect. Bridges are just for the fun of jumping around everywhere, but it is fun. It's a shame that in those 6 lines I've summarized almost all of hacking's effect on the gameplay. Ruh-roh. Hacking in Watch Dogs has no depth. In fact, dispatching your pursuers comes down to pressing a single button exactly when the game tells you. There's no skill gap, because there is no skill. It's just free kills at the tap of a finger. Hacking in stealth is rarely more complex. In fact, the only time hacking impressed me was the door lock blackout escapes, because it's the only time you can combine multiple hacks for a greater effect. Much of hacking is, in essence, a QuickTime event. Watch Dogs is an open-world third-person shooter. That's the gameplay. The idea upon which the game was sold just doesn't have much of a part to play. But it wasn't downgraded. Ubisoft never said that these systems would be any more deep than they are in any of the marketing material. That's important, because it shows how untempered expectations was just as much a knife in this game's gut as lies. In this case, we weren't disappointed because we had been messed around, we were disappointed because we expected better. Aiden might be all-powerful, but playing with that power is as shallow as Spider-Man PS4's puddles. Not so super now, huh? But perhaps still a hero. The fox fights crime as he sees fit, but watchdogs are rarely reasonable creatures. He isn't necessarily a paragon of virtue. That much is up to you. Enter the reputation system. Oh boy. Sounds sweet on paper, a very simple way of dynamically creating consequences to your actions, and that's what everyone assumed going in. Instead of using your super hearing to find crimes from great distances, you use the system to stop it from ever happening at all. Once you're at the scene, you find a place to hide, wait for it, and as soon as the criminal pulls the weapon, you intervene. I think there's one other variation on this, but that's the extent of the crime prediction mechanics in Watch Dogs. There's nothing else to say. What a joke. Saving a life gets you good rep, taking out a criminal does too. Extra if you put him down non-lethally. Logically, killing or injuring civilians gives bad rep, along with using unwarranted force on petty thieves and harming police officers to any degree. Logically, for a public image simulator, maybe not so logical from a game design perspective. The reputation system harshly conflicts with the gameplay, and in some cases is just broken. You will fail random crimes if you come out too early, which is ridiculous because you've saved a life no matter how you look at it. That's a flaw of the setup, but what the game considers to be too early is plainly ridiculous. You are only allowed to intervene when the UI goes from green to red, but you, as the player, should be watching the actual NPCs. It's still green when the criminal pulls the weapon, it's still green even when it's half pointed, which will fail you when you inevitably respond to the natural instinct to stop the crime before it happens. This is so severe that it's responsible for at least half of the times I've lost one of these events. Some crimes CTOS doesn't predict, those happen quickly in the streets, but the only way to get good rep out of them is with a melee takedown, because of course hitting him in the arse with a not very fast moving car instantly killed him and is unwarranted violence. But caving his head in with a tactical baton, no, that's entirely appropriate for the situation. This guy's robbed one wallet, so we should kick his head in. But 5 minutes later, we're walking down the street siphoning thousands from bank accounts. I'm not really grasping this game's moral compass. Not like the police were gonna stop him, but thanks to the rep system, they'll have a lot more luck stopping you. It takes hours of grinding crimes to get your rep up to a decent level, yet you can say goodbye to all of that if you ever use any amount of force against the force. Negative rep exists to make you feel like an arsehole, but I just want to play the game. I just want to use the combat system because it's fun, or at least to save my own skin by kneecapping an officer in my way. Kneecapping is actually a non-lethal option here, which is great, but it's nowhere near enough. I don't want to have to choose between having fun with the police and the entire rep system.
Listen, it calls to me
fun.
Who do you think's gonna win between you and
fun? That's the corner Ubisoft have backed themselves into. And it doesn't end there. But to talk about that, first we gotta discuss something a lot more infamous. The driving. According to Video Game Donkey, the driving in this game was developed by a gay rattlesnake named Fabio Enchilada. Being gay? Now, come on. My heart's red, your heart's red. That wouldn't have changed a damn thing. Being a rattlesnake, on the other hand, now, I can see how that might have caused some issues. But guess what? I think the physics are fine. Yeah, I said it. I love racing games and I love GTA's physics. It's not like I don't have anything else to contrast this against. In fact, I think it was the assumption that GTA is the gold standard for driving physics that caused this meteoric backlash. The sense of speed comes across smoothly thanks to the motion blurring of the rear of the car. You can J-turn like an absolute pimp, and they nailed the power sliding. My complaint is that the cars are a little too weighty, which is where it conflicts with the rep system. You slide very wide in these cars, which often takes you onto the sidewalk and therefore into civilians. You want to have fun with the driving or you want to maintain good rep? Having to choose? That doesn't seem so logical. So there we have it, the rep system in all its glory, which is none, because every subsystem that ties into it is either broken or directly conflicts with fun. I choose fun, and that's why I spent most of my current playthrough as an anarchist well into the red. Screw it, we live in a society. So what's my punishment? Well, negative repped Aiden will occasionally appear on breaking news broadcasts. And because Aiden is a Muppet, he always wears the same outfit. For some reason, CTOS can't use this to find you. But people do. NPCs recognize you, and unless you shut that down, the police will be dispatched. It's an immersive touch, but something tells me that even Ubisoft weren't happy with the rep system, because if that's their idea of punishment, then I just might take up some corporate espionage. Christ on a bendy bus. Any hopes of playing a vigilante is DOA thanks to this half-baked mess, the crimes being boring and broken, and the fact that your superpower is a QuickTime event. This game's getting less unique and more special by the minute. Tell you what though, what I didn't expect was that Aiden wouldn't need superpowers because he's already the Punisher. Watch Dogs actually reminds me quite a lot of Vanquish. You can play that game as a cover shooter, and if you do, it'll be safe. But it'll be slow and tremendously boring. It's when you start setting aside your predispositions and experiment with the combat that you transform from a little bitch into a supersonic acrobatic rocket-powered battle twat. With Watch Dogs, it's the same thing, except you become John Wick. Watch and see. Bet you didn't know you could do that. There's no talking about John Wick without talking about Visceral Carnage, the YouTuber who popularized this playstyle with his gameplay compilations. It was watching those that I realized how much more there is to get out of Watch Dogs' combat system, and that's what gave me the biggest push to get started on this video. At a basic level, Watch Dogs is a smooth, refined third-person shooter. There's a wide variety of weapons including assault rifles, snipers, shotguns, pistols, grenade launchers, and specializations within those groups. Some weapons are silenced, some shotguns are automatic. One of the snipers is an anti-mat rifle, which is great for disabling the police. As for the guys you'll be using those weapons against, the AI is completely unremarkable but adequately aggressive. What's important is that you'll never feel like the AI is too stupid to get you at any given position. The variety ain't half bad either. Basic gunman, then veteran, which is that with body armor. There's snipers and the shotgun-wielding enforcers too, who come with a full suit of body armor. There's no range at which the enemy is ineffective. The final piece of the Watch Dogs puzzle is the cover system, which is probably the best thing Ubisoft has contributed to the genre thus far. It sure as hell ain't perfect. Dying to snapping to the corner facing the enemy rather than away is a consistently frustrating issue, but otherwise it's easy to control and it's very clear exactly where you're going. My favorite feature is the fluidity of unsnapping, which is done by pulling back instead of pressing a button. All of that in one pot makes for a good third-person shooter, but just like Vanquish, there's a lot more to find here. The aggressive play you've seen is incentivized primarily by the gorgeous insta-kill takedown animations, which work for every weapon type bar grenade launcher, obviously. Without these, you wouldn't have a reason to get up close and personal. Without the vault kills, you wouldn't have a reason to parkour in combat. But you do. Of course, you can't melee everyone. Aggressive play is made viable in this case with the focus mechanic. There's a button entirely dedicated to slow-mo, which makes headshots and perfectly timed hacks easier, and mid-air grenade detonations possible. It also allows hacking on the run without sacrificing too much real time. And of course, it makes everything look badass. With highly effective explosive options, gorgeous takedowns and easy headshots, the slow-mo becomes an addiction. It's the closest thing to a John Wick video game in existence, and I'm counting John Wick Hex. I've always been of the mind that the coolest ways to play should be among the best ways to play, and Watch Dogs, a Ubisoft game, even has that going for it. You want to kill your enemies quickly? Best way of doing that is combining an explosion with chain headshots. Finish off anyone who gets too close with a takedown. There's no denying it's vastly riskier. If you screw up out in the open, you're a dead man. But that's exactly what the highest level of play should look like. Wouldn't be impressive if there was no risk. However, if this system was so flawless, you'd expect more people would know about it, huh? Well, it is among the best ways to play, but the best way to play is lower risk and takes far less skill. At the end of the day, if the low-risk strategy of sitting behind cover, spamming slow-mo headshots and grenade launcher is effective, then that's what players are going to do. There's no threat in the game that would force you out of that setup. Nothing that pushes you to attempt more skillful plays. You want Watch Dogs to really shine? Well, you're first going to need to be shown that it can shine, then bring your own intrinsic motivation to make it so. Additionally, the weapon balance can get thrown way off by the grenade launcher. The game never tells you to buy one, or even when they become available, but once you've got it, the best solution for dealing with enforcers and vehicles devolves from fun and interesting to the press of a button. Traffic battles, for example, ain't so intense when you can just introduce the cartel to a different type of blow. With no vehicles or enforcers though, Wiccan combat is still the quickest and among the best ways to play. For the sake of science, I dedicated myself to playing this way for the duration of the captured playthrough, and it was without question the highlight of the overall experience. Aiden Pierce is the Punisher of video games, and I think that's incredibly strange in a game marketed on hacking. Surely this would be the third-person shooter to have weapon limits and scarce ammo, right? Instead, we have an arsenal, slow-mo, regenerating health, and John Wick takedowns. Why is it this good at something completely off-topic? At any rate, I'm sad to say, Ubisoft use it as a crutch. Combat is dynamic by nature, but otherwise there's not a lot to get from the campaign's gameplay. Surprise, surprise, tailing is used constantly, but Ubisoft outdo themselves this time with reverse tailing, where you have to be as close as possible to maintain a data download. It's the deepest the campaign's gameplay scenarios get. Stealth is occasionally forced, but since guards can't hear the silenced pistol, these encounters are trivial. Watch Dogs seems to think that silenced weapons are actually silent. Doesn't take an expert to say that firing one 3 feet away from an enemy should tip them off. Not so here, and as such, chaining headshots with it is the only worthwhile strategy if you're looking to go unseen. I just wish the Spec Ops 1911 wasn't such an early unlock, because it makes most forced stealth encounters trivial. Where stealth is optional, skilled combat is quicker, and someone will notice you eventually. But the James Bond approach definitely should have been held back and is easily one of the sandbox's greatest flaws. Despite the campaign having the most basic objectives you've ever seen, Watch Dogs still suffers from one of the worst conventions of modern game design: needless restriction. Now this is nowhere near as garbage as Red Dead Redemption 2, but still, you kill someone in a tail mission, even when they're clearly no longer important, you fail. You come out 2 microseconds early in a random crime, you fail. Your target is too far away, even when you're rapidly gaining on them, you fail, because the nonsensical timer said so. You came up with an interesting way to get into Blom HQ. Nope, invisible wall, screw you. It never gets worse than when needless restriction is paired up with broken systems. And let's make this clear, the losing your target timer is straight up broken. It seems to trigger at random times, and the limits of how far away you can be feel arbitrary. You can be 30 meters away, which is fine, but then right after, 20 meters is too far. I think there's a line of sight system at play here, but this only works as intended when it's in a good mood. To be fair to the designers, there are occasions when restriction isn't so needless. If you need to steal a briefcase undetected because its contents will be compromised if there's any evidence of your presence, then it seems like the fact that I've just iced everyone, albeit undetected, should cause problems. Well, it doesn't. Or how about when you need to drive T-Bone's truck away from a squad of pursuers? I blew them all away as soon as they came anywhere near me, but the game still acts like they're right on my ass up until the end. Perhaps the solution isn't to have guaranteed fail states for killing someone here. Better, it's to create interesting gameplay out of forced ghost stealth or forced non-lethal chases, using your hacks to distract guards in interesting ways, or to manipulate the environment in significant ways. If that's too costly, then circumvent the problem entirely. Just don't have objectives that require perfect ghost stealth to uphold the story, and end the mission as soon as I've dealt with the problem, even if I'll miss out on a few lines of dialogue. That'd even add replay value. It's honestly depressing that in a game with such a unique idea, I'd be talking about the exact same issues as every other open world game. It's almost insulting that the only application other than QuickTime events of hacking in the campaign would be following some lines and an iPad minigame. But you know what? I don't think we're the only ones who are surprised, because the story doesn't seem to keep up with what this game is. It always assumes you're playing stealth. Like us before release, it thinks this is about hacking. But I didn't play Watch Dogs that way. I wanted to mess people up, and I did. Which kinda broke the immersion at times. For example, when Aiden is breaking into Rossi Fremont, he says that there's no way he can get in alone, so he'll need CTOS access. It's supposedly a fortress. But I've just John Wicked 20 armed men. Sneaking into Rossi Fremont doesn't seem so necessary from my perspective. Half of the story would be entirely irrelevant if we were just allowed to kick the door in and bust some heads. Imagine if that happened anyway. You know, I think it's kinda funny, or is it kinda sad? But the story does the exact same thing as the gameplay. You'll see. The almost stunning lack of ambition in Watch Dogs' story is without question the most disappointing part of the whole experience. This was a very novel concept for the time. The entire city is rigged up to a privatized network, but you have a way in. From the touch of your phone, the city itself bends to your will. It's an extremely attractive idea to the game's target audience, which shouldn't be insulting. People like phones, that's just how it is. Hackers can now be superheroes. What an idea. So what's the premise? Well, Aiden was working a job with his partner, who we don't know, at a place we don't know, for nothing more than money, until something we don't understand happened, and Aiden's niece, who we don't know, got whacked. So now he wants revenge. Pretty generic, hard to be invested, but there's potential. Wait, we get half of our revenge almost immediately. You see, the real story is going to be about rescuing Nikki, an uninteresting character who we don't care about. And to do that, we're going to spend half the game's entire runtime trying to infiltrate the hood, and then the other half poncing around with some hardcore blackmail, which itself is only relevant to the unknown 1%ers of one city. Don't think I'm exaggerating. Most of Watch Dogs focuses on ways of getting into one building. Every interesting character or subplot is given the bare minimum attention. Default, 2 missions. T-Bone, what, like 3 or 4? 1 building, about 15. Blom, CTOS, forget it. That's all background to the real story. It's not unambitious given the concept, it's unambitious for a generic revenge plot. They don't even try with making you want to save Nikki, which is Aiden's primary motive for 90% of the game. Watch Dogs went to all the trouble to create an interesting concept, and then proceeds to do everything it can to be as uninteresting as physically possible. The plot is almost entirely as I describe it above. That's what happens in Watch Dogs. But even being as unambitious as it is, far too often this weirdly structured generic disappointment doesn't even make sense. When you have to rescue Jackson for the second time, it's because he went out looking for the kidnapped Nikki, and the very first place he looks just happens to be a mafia stronghold. Oh, of course. Earlier in the Rossi Fremont saga, there comes a point where Aiden just decides he's going to shoot everyone. That impenetrable fortress we spent half the game trying to penetrate, well, Aiden's decided he's had enough of that now, even though Iraq knows who we are and what we want, because he caught Bedbug snooping around for us. That's another thing I don't get. Why on earth does Iraq let Bedbug live? Iraq tried to have Bedbug killed a couple missions ago, but now that he's unquestionably a traitor, Iraq just lets him live. We don't see what happens, but if Bedbug is able to call us right after Iraq dangles him out of a window, something's not adding up. How about when Aiden tells Damien to his face that he doesn't need him, and then immediately says that he needs him right afterwards? The story hits its all-time low when Nikki discovers that you're the vigilante. Are you being serious? What, did she think it might have been a different Aiden Pierce who wears trench coats and baseball caps? The news literally displays Aiden's full name and image on the daily, and I thought my jokes were bad. The story has very few legs to stand on. Thankfully, one of them is that Watch Dogs is a video game. The narrative doesn't have to go to much effort to immerse you in the setting. The hacking doesn't have to be deep to be evocative, and it can stand on the merits of the gameplay to grant tension and action. While hacking in the story is certainly shallow, the most evocative aspect of controlling cyberspace is the ability to pry into people's private lives. There's not much gameplay associated with hacking Helena Tucci's phone, but learning about all aspects of her private life, her family life, and using it to set up a trap so she leads us to her uncle. That's the kind of thing a hacker superhero would do. Being able to pry into anything you want, it gives you the same feeling that being invisible would. Free to see anything, and free of consequence. Another example of that would be watching people argue, fight and shag in Rossi Fremont. Ain't nothing like watching a gangbanger getting head from a Tesco value security camera, or discovering the details of the deepest criminal arrangements that the most dangerous people in the city are so very sure are completely hidden. Knowing people's dirty secrets is extremely appealing to us, deep down, and this game often uses that to draw you in. Similar privacy invasions are littered around the map. And true to reality, not everyone's darkest secret is something you want to know. Oh look, there's Geordie. He doesn't know we're watching. Geordie is among the first things that come to mind when you're talking about Watch Dogs' story. It's largely agreed that the characters are the story's greatest asset. You might remember such statements after the reviews came out in 2014. I agree, to an extent. The characters are the best part of Watch Dogs' story, but that implies there's some level of consistent quality, and there just isn't. Nikki, who the player needs to want to save, is the most generic human being to have ever been conceived. Some supporting characters like Default are interesting and entertaining, while the arch-villains of the plot are so shallow they make Zoella look like Plato. We rarely interact with Damien, Nikki's captor, in any meaningful way, and when he does contact you, it's always some spin on, "We used to be partners, Aiden, what happened? Now get my data or I'll feed your sister into a meat grinder." He's unchanging and dimensionless, thank God for his voice actor. Lucky Quinn, the mob boss who hired Maurice, appears about 3 times and he has even less to him than Damien. He's a mob boss, that's the start and end of it. Critically important characters are barely characters at all, and that's without doubt the story's greatest weakness. But the best of the characters are without doubt, the story's greatest strength. Who else to start with but Geordie? His erratic archetype is a bit cliche today, but he was fresh in games at the time. He's fantastically written, voiced even better, and he fits so well because he contrasts so severely with Aiden. Aiden is a no-nonsense man, and neither is Geordie. But Aiden's upfront about that. Geordie takes a eulogy to get to the point. Their personalities clash, and as it is with contrasting duos, that brings out the best of their personalities. T-Bone is much the same, except he's a redneck instead of a neurotic sociopath. He beats you up, he puts the moves on Clara, he blares ding-a-ding-dang my dang-along-ling-long through your headphones while you roast the local militia with a spider trap. The contrast is there, and thanks to his legendary status as Raymond Kenny, top CTOS Don, he's very interesting too. How has the people he got killed in the 2003 blackout affected him? What really went down at Blom? Clara is far less exotic, but like the others, she's similar and different to Aiden. She's elusive, careful, and wants to see justice done, but she's new to the violence that kind of thing incites. She's incredibly smart and also far more positive than Aiden. She's willing to joke around with him. There's a lot of depth to her motivation too, as you find out that she's the one who sold you and Damien out to Quinn. The guilt of having played such a large hand in Lena's death is the real reason she stuck around for so long. Watching Clara die as that guilt consumes her makes for a somewhat impactful death. Bedbug is no hacker, but he is the focus of multiple missions in Act 2, and he brings that part of the game to life. He's in a complicated situation, having failed Iraq and on the brink of being killed for it, but also having a sky-high ambition. When Aiden blackmails him into stealing Iraq's data, the two even end up bonding in a very natural way. Bedbug is fully capable of understanding why Aiden is doing what he is, despite the pair being from different worlds. Aiden even becomes highly protective of him by the end, creating a significant sense of guilt in the player when we think we've got him killed. That leaves us with the cover guy, the Fox. Aiden is the driving of Watch Dogs characters because everyone thinks he's rubbish, except for me. Before you call the police, let me explain. I love the ways Aiden operates. I hope I've proved that he's kind of a badass, but it's the mind games that interest me the most. Aiden's skill in psychology is what drives much of the plot. He very overtly attempts to manipulate Clara with intimidation. He uses it to figure out what Damien knows and what he doesn't know, what he'll say and what he won't. From our live viewing of Iraq's confrontation with Bedbug, we learn how close Bedbug is to the grave, and Aiden uses that fact to ceremoniously blackmail him. Where Damien was able to exploit weak lines of code in the machine, Aiden did it in reality. People are his biggest weapon. He hacks them as much as he does the city. That's compelling, and it makes everything he accomplishes so much more believable. Aiden is in many ways Hacker Batman, and I like that. Driven by tragedy, almost certainly unhinged, and very questionably moral. Batman will do anything it takes to protect the innocent, but if he isn't willing to kill the villains he helped create, how is he not in some way responsible for the deaths that follow? Aiden, meanwhile, is more than willing to kill everyone, anyone who gets in his way. It was a mistake that did Lena. How many Lenas do you think died so Aiden could get his revenge? How many families lost their fathers? The ending of Watch Dogs struck me. Aiden smashes the Merlot's defense and corners the lucky Quinn, who spent his entire life thinking himself untouchable, into a small panic room with only a pane of glass between them. Bulletproof glass stops bullets, but not signals. So we hack Lucky's pacemaker, stopping his heart dead. You've just reduced an entire criminal organization to ash, and Aiden says that he doesn't feel empty, he feels alive, like he can breathe again. Damien is next to the block. This final fight is uncharacteristically climactic for Watch Dogs. You spend the entire game hacking small objects from a phone, now hack all of Chicago from a satellite. You used Blackout in a small area to slip away from the cops, now take down the entire city. You used the road network as your weapon, now it's being fired at you. The rules you took for granted are all being made something more. But T-Bone is the living example of what happens when you play God. His well-intentioned Blackout killed 13 innocent people, and now you're doing the same damn thing for revenge. When the credits rolled and Aiden gave his final monologue, I wasn't impressed. I don't look back anymore. I don't regret. I look forward. Everything is connected, and I'll use that to expose, to protect, and if necessary, to punish. That wasn't badass, that was scary, because we're seeing an unhinged murderer trying to convince himself that he knows what is right, and who deserves to live or die. It's delusions of grandeur, and a terrifying reflection of Blom itself. CTOS has given Aiden a power no one has ever had before, and he does with it whatever he feels. Is that not exactly the reason Aiden fights Blom? Because they abuse the system, because that level of control is immoral. In many ways, they're the same. At first I thought this might not have been intentional, but it's a fact that Aiden's character was partially inspired by Walter White. His selfishness hurts hundreds, including those around him. Why does he have to be likable? He just has to be interesting, and I for one think he is. Be a hell of a lot better if I was motivated by the same people he was. My favorite touch was the very last moment of the campaign. You get to choose between killing or forgiving Maurice. Aiden begins the story believing that scum like him are everything wrong with the world. But by the end, he wonders if they're that different at all. Aiden is someone else's Maurice. Do they deserve a second chance? Who decides that? I've always taken this choice as putting Aiden on a final path. If you kill Maurice, you've made your decision. You think you know what's right, and you'll kill anyone who thinks otherwise. If you let him go, maybe there's enough good in Aiden to hold on to. Maybe they can both be better, and I think that's a very powerful place to end it. So then, campaign objectives suffer from being too restrictive and too repetitive. It relies on the strength of the great gameplay alone and does nothing to provide interesting or unique gameplay scenarios. The story is unambitious, treating its most unique aspects as nothing more than set dressing. It frequently makes no sense whatsoever and is thoughtlessly structured, spending most of its time focused on one boring goal, but almost none on far more interesting threats like Default or DedSec or Blom. Watch Dogs' campaign entertained me because I found the way that you hacked into people's lives, either through the invasiveness of CTOS or the perceptiveness of Aiden's mind, to be surprisingly evocative. Chicago's beautiful atmospheric environments kept me consistently immersed. The gameplay had me chasing the next rush like an adrenaline junkie, and I greatly enjoyed the handful of adequately fleshed out characters. Aiden most of all. He wasn't hugely compelling, he wasn't deep or thoughtful, he certainly wasn't likable, but I found the way that they applied the Walter White archetype to a vigilante remarkably intriguing. I just wish some better writers got a chance to expand on his story, instead of whoever's responsible for what we got. It wasn't hard for me to get a grasp on how I felt about this story, but I don't think I'll ever understand why it truly felt like it was trying to be uninteresting. It's not like Ubisoft had a bad track record for stories in their games. So, what's next for Watch Dogs? Well, that was just the concern. What do you do in Watch Dogs besides the campaign? I remember when I watched the trailer that supposedly had the answers for the very first time. I can't say I didn't have a seat on the hype train. We were told that there'd be chess, poker, infiltrating criminal organizations, criminal convoys, all kinds of driving contracts, digital trips, AR games. The wealth of content seemed incredible. The inclusion of chess was what blew me away the most, because it said to me that they had so much content that they just started throwing in board games. And you know what? That trailer left plenty of things for us to discover at release too. There was more in the game than advertised. Who are you and what have you done with my industry? So how on earth did I still manage to come away disappointed? Simple. Because it was as wide as an ocean, but as deep as Paris Hilton. Those AR games? Yeah. In the trailer, they said Cash Run was where you'd put your parkour skills to the test. What skills? You're following a preset route. So this is just holding a single button to initiate automatic parkour animations. But Envision makes that look like Mirror's Edge. You're firing unimpactful bullets at wave after wave of aimlessly floating enemies for upwards of 25 minutes. It's boredom taken to a science. Chess, poker, and the betting street game are all impressive in the trailer, but in practice, why would you ever play these in Watch Dogs? What the game brands as side missions are criminal convoys, fixer contracts, and gang hideouts. Yeah, there's a whole 3 types. That's sure to keep you entertained. Hideouts are some guys in an arena. It's just a combat encounter, except you have to melee one specific enemy in the pack to succeed. If you enjoy the combat, you'll enjoy this, but it adds nothing except more basic encounters copy and pasted 15 times. Fixer contracts are races, though admittedly I appreciate the amount of variation in the 46 that exist. Many are just checkpoint to checkpoint, but some have you evade the police. Some have you get to a destination with as little damage on your car as possible. Some have you switch into different cars mid-race to full CTOS. It's harder to get bored of these, and as someone who has no issue with the driving in this game, the first 10 were decent fun. The other 36, I'll get back to you. That leaves us with criminal convoys. And it's easy to point at these as the ultimate example of copy and paste. Same idea 18 times over. But that doesn't matter if the event is dynamic and unrestricted enough, because it's likely you'll have a different experience each time. You know the enemy route straight off the bat, which immediately creates interesting decisions. You know their path, so you get to choose where to begin your assault. You're looking for somewhere with protection, and that the AI have no easy escape. That's usually a single road with walls, no offshoots, and your car blocking off the frontal escape. You could go further along their route, but have to wait for longer. You could go closer to them, but risk not having enough time to set up. Good decisions, risk reward. It's satisfying to get a successful outcome when the game doesn't hold your hand. How you choose to approach the assault depends on whether you need the target alive or dead. Dead is typically just grenade launcher and IEDs, but if you miss, you better act quick because they'll bolt. Alive requires a much more careful application of explosives and a conventional weapon. Traffic battles are always great fun in Watch Dogs thanks to the manipulable and highly destructible cover, along with the civilians who you can rescue or sacrifice in an explosion. If the enemy escapes, hey, you get a car chase. Grenade launchers can make these trivial if you prevent their escape well enough, which is an issue. But if you need the target alive, these don't face the same problem. Criminal convoys are nothing short of excellent. That's what happens when freedom and dynamism meet. But I don't know if any of these should have been considered side missions. And it's a shame about the other two, huh? 18 out of 79 isn't exactly what I'd call a successful turnout. Side missions in Watch Dogs are a collection of basic objectives with minor variations that rely entirely on the strength of the gameplay. Where have I heard that before? What this is a clever disguise. In any other game, should I say any other Ubisoft game, a gang hideout is just on the map. Naturally, a criminal convoy would simply be found while driving around the open world. Here, they put them behind a little icon and a loading screen so that they could be counted as side missions. They aren't. They're bog-standard open-world encounters that aside from fixer contracts would have been better unseparated and unlimited. Anyway, time to smoke some crack. Crack dealers are marked by blue default icons on the map, but you can also order some from your phone. I guess the Watch Dogs world has finally figured out how to download RAM, because in this game you can just download drugs. Who knew? There are 4 flavors of drug in Watch Dogs, and you can consider the micro games they present as about a third of the game's side content. We'll start small. The first flavor is called psychedelic, where you trampoline from giant flower to giant flower. Closer you get to the middle, the more points you get, and there's extra if you go through the hoops. I have no idea why this is in the game, but I'm not complaining. Why not, right? Psychedelic doesn't have much to it. You can't talk to aliens or trees, and you can't watch our 3 dimensions fold up into an origami, and you can't watch as your true place in the universe is bluntly placed before you, causing your ego to shred away like tissue paper, but, on the other hand, I do think Joe Rogan would like this. Next up is Spider Tank. It's a tank, but it does everything a spider can. It's super strong, it's never wrong, and it's got a radioactive dong. Can it swing? From a web. It would rather blow off your head. Hey there goes the taxpayers' money. This is a rampage essentially, but that doesn't make it easy. There are 15 levels, each one is an objective from a possible 5, and each is harder than the one before it. You can get destroy a set number of vehicles, destroy an armored truck, kill the right amount of police officers, and so on. I wouldn't say there's a whole lot of depth to this. It's really just a matter of conserving cannon ammo and getting close enough for the claw attack, but it's still good fun until the novelty wears off. Hanging upside down from the railway as you open fire on the police force is a very unique action experience. Why is it found in Watch Dogs? Who knows, but it's here, so sure. Okay, man, if only real crack was like this. I'm kinda new to judging acid trips in games, especially ones that take themselves this seriously, but I'm trying my best here. This is madness. The third trip, not the idea, but that's debatable, because madness is essentially Carmageddon. You're being egged on by Damien, who I guess is cosplaying Satan, to kill as many demons as possible. Color of the fire determines the points, and for every soul you consume, you charge your abilities, each of which kills more demons, so it's a positive feedback loop. Positive feedback is exactly what I'm giving here. This trip is legitimately fantastic. And I'll admit, a lot of that's down to the sexy synthwave in the background, but the gameplay is just as strong. Like Spider Tank, there's a progression of objectives, killing X number of demons, getting X high kill streak, escaping the cops, and driving a far enough distance. Fairly basic driving challenges essentially, but in Madness the driving can truly shine. The cars are too weighty for the tight streets in Chicago, but you're aiming to make a mess here. You want to be power sliding into groups of pedestrians, and that feels amazing. It's deep, it's exciting, it's absolutely great, but alone is genius. This is clearly some kind of depressant, because you're alone in a city where everyone else is gone and the streets are ruled by robots, all searching for you. Their leader, Nikki. She hates you. This is Aiden's nightmare, which makes it almost personal. Alone gets to feed off any investment you have in the main story. Chicago is shrouded in darkness, and that darkness comes from generators. The game is to sneak past the robots, up to the generators, and hack them. You do that, the veil is lifted, and the robots die. You win when Chicago is entirely purged. Symbolic, perhaps, for Aiden's outlook on CTOS. It might sound basic, but there's a lot of game here. At the core, the skill at the forefront is stealth. You've got to weave your way through the lights, which can crisscross and progressively offer smaller and shorter windows to get through. You can move faster with sprint, but robots can detect the noise. You can sacrifice momentum and risk being spotted for a melee takedown, which is balanced by continually fresh spawns as you get closer to the generator. Once you hack it, you get a skill point. Every trip other than psychedelic has its own tree, and for the most part, that's just for replay value. But alone is different. Every upgrade is invaluable. Hacking the generator from a higher range, abilities to disable all robots in a given area, an EMP gun. Every skill point you assign will save your life at one point or another. And so, just like the gameplay, leveling up consistently presents interesting decisions. Alone is stunningly deep, and it gets better. You're detected. Do you want to go lethal or non-lethal? Lethal is a greater risk because you have to slow down, but non-lethal has them back on your tail in less than 10 seconds. You can't afford to be wasteful because ammo is scarce. It gets better still. Positioning. The boundaries between the light and the dark realms are not equidistant from the generator. In other words, the generator is not at the center of every dark realm, so it's up to you to choose which part of the city to insert from. Cars lose power as soon as you cross the border, so it's a very high-risk time saver to build up as much momentum as possible and ram the veil, allowing you to coast for 10 or 20 meters. When that gets you detected, there's quite a skill cap in running too. EMP grenades are hackable, so it can be smart to throw the bomb ahead of you and wait for the enemies pursuing from the front and the back to meet before detonating. Alone is not only deeply symbolic for Aiden, but it also has one of the most striking atmospheres I've felt in games. The name couldn't be more appropriate. It's deep, tense, fun, and the outfit for freeing the city is a badass reward. Alone is easily among the greatest side content I've ever played in a game. The entire digital trip menu is a brilliant surprise. How this magnificence found itself hidden behind an app in a smartphone, but 15 copy and paste combat encounters were titled Side Mission baffles me. You just can't compress these two severely contrasting extremes into one rating. The side content is both a mediocre slog and absolutely fantastic. I can only hope we see digital trips return for Legion. So, what's next for Watch Dogs? I've asked this question before, but all of us ask it twice. Once after we're done with the campaign, and once after we're finished or bored with the side content. Usually the answer is nothing. Move on. But there's a reason I'm still playing GTA 5 in 2019. Because it has easy access gameplay. That's the gold mine of replayability very few single-player developers look to tap. Why do I come back to Spider-Man Web of Shadows after all these years? Because I can load it up in seconds and I'm interacting with the best gameplay it has to offer, swinging and combat. No hindrance, I can just jump in and blow off some steam. That's the exact reason I'm still playing Prototype, and it's the same thing for GTA. But GTA is just a bit different. The driving's decent, but there's no exciting combat encounters for me to engage in around every corner, is there? Technically, there is. Police. A consistently strong action experience that plays out just a little bit differently each time. And the reason for that is dynamism. Dynamic gameplay is unscripted cause and effect. You make a move, the game makes a proportional move back. You respond, the game responds. That's how the world works. And that's how you end up with 1,000 different possibilities in any situation. If you fight the police, they fight back. If you keep fighting, they fight harder. If you move, they move, bringing combat encounters to any region of the map. Everywhere is the arena. If you run, they chase. If you continue to run, they block your path. If you dodge it, they might be slowed down. If you continue onto the sea, they follow in the appropriate vehicle. If you get far enough away, you hide. If you hide, they attempt to find you, so you ensure you're out of sight. And if you're detected, it all starts again. Until one side is overwhelmed, the world always has a response. There's a consequence to every action, which creates a constant conflict in which the situation is always changing, the gameplay is consistently challenging, and the decisions you make are always interesting. That's why police systems can do so much for replayability when they're refined as well as GTA's, because great gameplay is there whenever you want it, and it's very often something fresh. I won't act like GTA has mastered the police system, far from it, but there's a reason I'm playing GTA and not Watch Dogs for fun in 2019. Dynamic gameplay is a chain, which is as strong as its weakest link. The consequence of a decision needs to be proportional to the severity of that decision. For example, if I whip out a grenade launcher and the game drops a nuke on me, that kinda breaks the chain. Fleetwood Mac would not approve. Watch Dogs, like Belle Delphine fans, is burdened with a number of kinks. If you choose to hack the L train, the police have no response. You can leave your game and come back an hour later, Aiden will have escaped without a scratch. Similarly, if you at any point choose to get in a boat, the police cannot respond. They have no coastal force. Not even helicopters, because the snipers can't shoot through the roof, and they give up in seconds. Sometimes though, the tables are turned. Helicopters come out at 2 stars, but they're all packing highly accurate snipers who'll kill you in 3 shots or less if you don't start running or get in a vehicle. This is made vastly more severe by the fact that Aiden Pierce doesn't work. His greatest weakness apparently is the inability to look up. You have to be able to see the helicopter to hack it or shoot it, so when it hovers directly over you, you're Donald Ducked. 3 significant imbalances weaken the chain immensely, but the police aren't off the hook yet. The dynamically created gameplay isn't always fun, because it isn't always fair. God have mercy on the soul of whoever okayed this big green petri dish prick. It's like that horror movie It Follows, because that's what it does. It chases you across the map, which makes the same mistake GTA does. It forces you to focus all your attention on the minimap, and as a result has you crashing into everything because you're too busy playing this iPad game. The frustration comes into play when you find yourself in a situation that you physically cannot escape, either because they follow faster than your car moves, or because multiple appear directly in your path. Check out this bridge here. What am I meant to do? Activate my warp drive? I'm in the fastest car in the game. When CTOS is after you, your fate is in the hands of God, which is as annoying in-game as it is in real life. Though there are consumables for slowing it down, these aren't good enough when the system is fundamentally bad. You can imagine how immensely frustrating the inconsistency is when you need to get to a marked location on the map without the police following. My next issue is the AI. The police in this game ram at light speed first, ask questions in hell. In some ways this is decent. Sticking with you keeps things tense, and it allows you to run your pursuers into the environment or oncoming traffic. The problem is their disregard for personal space results in you slowing down, not speeding up, which feeds right into the helicopter problem and the reputation problem. Aiden only uses lethal weapons on foot, but you're gonna be on foot when the police have rammed your car into the 5th dimension. You've got kinks in a dynamic chain, you've got counterintuitive AI, and I'd honestly rather be detected by Charles Manson than this green bastard one more time. If the police are incapable of producing consistently enjoyable, easy access gameplay, then what does Watch Dogs have to offer long term? The answer to what's next for Watch Dogs is... Wait, what? Oh, of course. Everyone compares Watch Dogs to Dark Souls, and I mean, it basically is just Dark Souls with guns. Both games have 2 words in the title, both games have only 1 S in the title, and both games have invasions. Easily one of the most impressive features in Watch Dogs is the way you can seamlessly appear in someone else's single-player world without them knowing a thing. Once you've found the poor, innocent, unsuspecting player who still plays Watch Dogs in 2019, you must either follow the player for a set amount of time or begin a hack. It's your job to stay undetected until the download completes. It's theirs to find you before that happens. If they do, you run, they follow, and so do bullets. If you escape, you fail far less severely than if you were killed. This cat and mouse can be incredibly tense due to the time limit and the scarcity of good places to hide. You could find yourself ducked down in a car as the target sequentially blows up every vehicle nearby. You might need to rapidly adjust positions to avoid being profiled, or blend in with a crowd so you don't stick out. It's a remarkably unique gameplay experience. Watch Dogs can be proud of that. I'm incredibly impressed that they didn't just make this a basic PvP invasion and leave it at that. This is what was next for Watch Dogs, and it still is today. I was being invaded regularly on my playthrough just a couple weeks ago, but unfortunately, I didn't always jump with joy when I realized that Smokeweed for Life 420 was trying to rob my 6 gigs of because the thing with invasions is, they're involuntary. I'm just trying to get to the next mission. I'm not always in the mood to play cat and mouse for 5 minutes. In many ways, Dark Souls is more forgiving, because you choose the risk when you take the benefits of going human. This frustration has resulted in most people I know turning off invasions in the menu, which means far less unique experiences. It's a damn tough situation for Ubisoft. There's no win-win. My suggestion would be AI invasions. The first time you're ever invaded in-game is by an AI, that's not a real player. So just take that and make it an enemy type. You wouldn't feel so frustrated when there's no social consequence to losing, and you could still get a degree of that gripping gameplay. On top of invasions, you have multiplayer deathmatch, races, and free roam. Of course, with Watch Dogs being in direct competition with GTA, and GTA being what everyone goes to for a multiplayer city sandbox, these modes weren't exactly popular. But there still was a lot of fun to be had, especially in free roam. I remember getting together with all my friends in a lobby, heading over to the bridge under construction, and setting up our own little deathmatch. Of course, I never told them that I had the destroyer which could punch through concrete, so every time I wall-hacked them, they could only assume it was down to my elite skill. Good times. I remember once I had a friend search for me, but because the game never told you when a player left, I had him convinced for about 30 minutes that he was just a hair away from finding me. All the while I was doing hideouts in single player. That's the worst thing I've ever done in my life. Yeah, I had good times on Watch Dogs. He didn't. It's a shame that Watch Dogs' greatest form of long-term appeal is something that too many people will choose to avoid, leaving them generic multiplayer modes they could get anywhere else, and a deeply flawed police system. This game has my eternal respect for having the balls and the creativity for the invasions. They're special enough that they can keep people playing. I've seen it. But that's for the few. For the many, it was time to move on. I'd like to take some time in this video to talk about something I don't think anyone will expect. Music. And I'm not talking about the OK radio. It was the original soundtrack that impressed me the most. If you go ahead and listen to it now, you'll probably agree. The music in Watch Dogs is boring, uninspired trash. Wait, but yeah, there's a bit of a problem here. You see, most of the worthwhile tracks in the game are all unreleased. They had to be ripped from the game files, stitched together, and uploaded to YouTube. The reason behind the disorder was that the music would dynamically respond to your actions. That works great, but it means that the track has no set order and no set length. That's probably the reason all of these gems were left hidden. Of course, the absolute legend Shivaxi, who just did it himself, proved that that reason wasn't really good enough. The bunker mission is literally just walking around an island doing basic puzzles. But because of the gorgeous track in the background, it's not just that. It's Aiden feeling a sense of happiness for the first time in days. It's the rediscovery of a mysterious, legendary place, at the core of what Aiden is fighting against. Hold On Kiddo is nothing more than a bog-standard traffic battle, but thanks to the pounding synths playing as you fight, it's not standard. It's a fight for the only thing in the world that matters to Aiden. It's do or die. Collateral is a typical arena fight, with typical reinforcements and typical escort mechanics. But the music makes it so much more than that. Sounding a lot like The Dream is Collapsing, Collateral's elegance and power ramps the intensity off the charts. The gems continue throughout the game, and they never stop drawing you into the moment. Ryan Rietzl should have won awards for this. Instead, the soundtrack was forgotten, and no one talks about it to this day. There's certainly groups of people out there who believe the same thing is true of the entire experience, an underappreciated gem that still holds up today. I disagree. But I also disagree that Watch Dogs deserved what it got. What it got was Annihilation. The very title of the game unfairly plagues people's preconceptions of its sequel, its DLC, and Legion. Watch Dogs isn't trash. I've never seen anything in my dumpster that had entertained me for 15 hours with interesting characters and fantastic gameplay. The digital trips are some of the best side content I've ever played. The multiplayer is creative and unique. Chicago is beautiful and immersive. The music is nothing short of amazing. Watch Dogs deserve deep and severe critique, not a scorched earth policy, and yet I understand why they dropped the nukes. Watch Dogs' marketing was a betrayal of not just itself, but of people's expectations of next-gen gaming as a whole. You could see the collective disappointment from the surface of the moon, and Ubisoft needed to know that what they had done was unacceptable. In fact, let's have a look at some of the trailers so you can see for yourself why this happened. Everyone knows about the drastic graphics downgrade, that in-game could be at best approached with mods on PC. Some YouTube demonstrations of what is supposedly ray tracing shaders were uploaded a short while ago, and even they don't match the E3 demo. But don't assume that was the only way we were manipulated onto the hype train.
You can hack into anyone's life. Tap their phones, their music, their accounts. Identify criminals, disrupt communications.
You just can't though. It's like this was written by a lawyer because they're just skimming the edge of what is technically true. Identify criminals can only happen in the exact same way during random crime events, and you can't hack anyone's life unless you assume that everyone's life is as deep as an income in a single defining sentence.
And if you cross the wrong citizen, you risk a bounty on your head.
That's simply not in the game. Pursuing enemies are just reinforcements, not a dynamic bounty system as implied.
You may be forced into the darker corners of Chicago. Chicago.
Again, this isn't dynamic. The use of a conditional is misleading. There's never a threat great enough to force you anywhere in the open world, and threat levels certainly don't change based on your actions. Here we see a blackout from the surrender position. I think this is one of the most iconic moments from all of Watch Dogs' marketing, but you can't do that in-game. There's no surrender animation for drawing cops close enough for a takedown. Some of it is straight up lies, and though a lot of it is legally true, it blatantly implies something more. When people jumped into Chicago on May 7th, 2014 with no warning thanks to the review embargo, a Herculean backlash was inevitable. What happened to Watch Dogs is exactly what Ubisoft deserved. It's just not what Watch Dogs deserved. I think it's incredibly ironic that a game with themes of corporate control, abuse of the system, abuse of power, would end up as a demonstration of greed. More so than Cyberpunk, Watch Dogs presents what seems like an inevitable dystopia. Futuristic dystopian worlds consistently feature a class disparity so great that the powers that be can buy their superiority in increasingly more meaningful ways. Deus Ex shows us what happens when those who can afford it simply buy a better body, a faster mind. Watch Dogs isn't so literal. They buy the eyes of a city, they buy people's secrets, they buy the power to make their will a reality. A political problem stands too close to a steam pipe. Ah, what a shame, it just happened to detonate. Even what Blom does in-game with the power we know they have is surprisingly limited. What happens when CTOS doesn't let you get on the train? When it doesn't let you use your accounts or open your car door? What happens when your life can be turned off remotely because the system said you were a criminal and there's nothing you can do to fight it? CTOS is a very elegant way of introducing the same level of control as microchips in the body, without the need to open you up. It's a terrifying world, deeply relevant to our today. There are places where you can't travel if you speak out of turn. There are places where you can't turn a corner without eyes. I appreciate Watch Dogs for presenting a modern dystopia. It isn't a future, the parts already exist. They need only be combined. I will truly never understand why the game, having developed such a world, chose to tell an irrelevant story. At least I can speak for the maturity with which CTOS is tackled. Blom deal under the table with fixers and hackers to take care of problems CTOS can't. They employ blackmail instead of overt murder to maintain a public image. They use that blackmail to install puppet politicians. A game with themes like this should take itself seriously. It should aim to be as believable as possible. I mean, hacking the world from an iPhone and Aiden being the Punisher with no training is what one might consider unlikely. But the tone is right. Another shot with better writing, that could have been perfect. Which of course brings me on to Watch Dogs 2. This game's plot actually focuses on its themes. Blom is the primary antagonist, but the ridiculous levity with which it tackles them totally undermines any weight the game could have had. Yeah, let's just outright slaughter half of Blom's security force, cause worldwide blackouts, and carve our way through every known mob in the city. Forget PTSD or losing oneself or any real consequence to going after the most powerful people on the planet. Let's make bad jokes in our hacker cave, as we laugh at the nerdy slogans on each other's t-shirts and stuff our faces with Pizza Hut. When you tackle mature themes in such a childish way, you don't get to act like you've delivered a productive message. Too much control bad can't be taken seriously when you've chosen to tell it through a ridiculous, goofy comedy with no stakes and no consequences. Fight the power comes across as we live in a society. The Teletubbies would be better suited for this than Twat Boy Slim and his band of Rage Against the Machine groupies. This franchise still hasn't lived up to its theme. Watch Dogs could have had a deeply meaningful story. Instead, it serves as a warning of a different kind. Ubisoft still pays the price of lies. So, what's next for Watch Dogs? Of course there's more, at a disproportional cost in the form of DLC. How does the saying go? Plan for success, prepare for failure. They certainly planned for success, just didn't realize that after the incident, no one in their right mind would pay for Watch Dogs again. Smartly, their first move was a new digital trip, Conspiracy. You shoot cyborgs in their weak spots. That's it. It makes Psychedelic look like a masterpiece. Moving on, Watch Dogs' flagship story DLC, Bad Blood, is just a little depressing to look back on. Because I've never spoken, in all my time gaming, to one other person who played this. Understandably so, but Bad Blood didn't deserve to be ignored. Though, that's not what I was thinking when I started it. Straight off the bat, the game pitches a new hackable object, the door. Creative, I know. The idea being you'd lure a guard into an office, lock the door behind him, and that'd be that. Why on earth would you go to all that trouble when you have a silenced pistol and a big-ass spanner? I don't know. It was a waste of development time and your own. Gotta admit, the bug that got me killed by turning my direction inputs into wild, uncontrollable spinning didn't help Bad Blood's case. Or the bug 3 minutes later that wouldn't let me get into the L train. Or the bug 30 seconds after that sent the L train into the Shadow Realm while I was still in it. It's safe to say that this DLC did not make a healthy impression. But then, things got going. Bad Blood does what a DLC should. It's not just more of the main game. Instead, it uses the main game as a base and expands upon it. To be fair, T-Bone is just Aiden but with a huge throbbing wrench instead of this tiny little stick. But it's the mission design that does the work. In the second mission, Tobias Frewer, a man who has had to pay for T-Bone's mistakes, is kidnapped and thrown into the trunk of a car. You have to track him down before his phone battery runs out. Seems easy, but the twist is you only get a small blip of signal followed by 5 seconds of nothing. This way, you'll never know when they've taken a turn. You've got to predict where they're headed and plan an intercept at the most problematic spot. For example, if they're headed towards a highway, you can't know if they'll get on it, but it will be the biggest problem if they do, so that's the place to be. A very fresh logic-based challenge, created by a very simple limitation. I love it. Later, you're walking Tobias through the city in an attempt to lure fixers out of hiding. The profiler uses the crime probability meter on every suspect, which creates a consistently tense atmosphere as you wait for the fixers to pounce. Well, they do, which is an understatement. A sheer battalion of them assault Tobias's hideout, but his chronic paranoia finally pays off. The surrounding cameras are now armed with machine guns and grenade launchers. Since they work on a cooldown system, the idea is you hop from one camera to another, constantly changing your angles and providing a usable weapon. Hacking used for mass murder, Aiden would be so proud. The most fascinating mission mechanically is without doubt Blom Forge. Why? Well, because you can see Watch Dogs 2 being built before your very eyes. Blom Forge immediately reminded me of the sequel's level design through the verticality outside and the more casual, friendly aesthetic inside. First up on the tour are the laser grids, which make for some pretty decent movement challenges. We certainly had lasers in Watch Dogs 2, but I don't remember it being taken this far. In the same spirit, we also get our very first in-world hacking puzzle. The perspective shift encourages a bit of movement to make sense of all the angles and directions. It almost doesn't feel like a flip phone minigame. Not impressed enough? Well, say hello to Eugene. Yeah, it's the jumper's daddy, which we use in much the same way. Using vents to hack otherwise impassable obstacles, kicking some ass with an inbuilt stun gun. It's like a demo for the sequel, and it's easily the best mission in the expansion. For a 10-mission long campaign, I'd say those mechanics are more than enough to keep the experience interesting. But Bad Blood continues to provide fresh and exciting levels even when it's relying on basic Watch Dogs gameplay. The narrative of Bad Blood is that Default is trying to be the Joker. Sure seems like the type, because one of the 11 people killed in T-Bone's blackout was Default's suicidal brother. Inbred Mao 5 is hell-bent on destroying you. Stopping that from happening takes you on a merry chase. From using a crane for fighting fixers in a cargo ship, to boating over to a dilapidated mansion now being used as an illegal hospital, to escaping that same area as the police and fixers go to war. The variation in setting works wonders for both the story and the gameplay, which finds its spectacular climax in Default's madhouse. You get some gorgeous combat arenas, you get stunned with infrasonic sound in a room made of television screens, and finally you come to a maze. The idea here is that you guide Tobias through the maze using the cameras, which ends up being remarkably tense. Default then transforms the maze into cover and it becomes another arena. Considering how damn many of the final few levels were primarily composed of giant combat arenas, it's impressive that the level design was able to keep things fresh. Easily the strongest encounter in the DLC is the home invasion. I said when I came into the lower levels of the silo for the first time, that if this ended up being a combat arena later in the campaign, I'd call the police on Ubisoft. Well, it turns out that's not considered an emergency. So I'll tell you instead. Just by looking at this place, you know exactly what's going to happen here. Developers don't make intricate arenas because they're pretty, so I knew our charming base was going to be bathed in blood 7 missions before it was, an easily avoidable oversight. That said, the battle that takes place here is certainly worth the wait. It's a damn fun arena, and it's filled with hackable traps too, just like the junkyard. Except without ding-a-ding-dang-a-dang-a-long-ling-long. The gameplay on offer from Bad Blood is already strong because it uses Watch Dogs as a foundation, but it builds off that in all the ways I hoped for, by providing creative gameplay scenarios, interesting new mechanics, and fantastic arenas to put your John Wick skills to the test. There's not a great deal to be said about Bad Blood's story. It is only 10 missions, but I will say that it shares the exact same strengths as Watch Dogs. The characters are what you're here for. We understand why Default hates T-Bone, and we see that in Default's characteristically mad style. I found myself far more invested in T-Bone this time too. He's burdened by the guilt of the people he got killed in 2003, and he's been fighting to redeem himself ever since. Tobias lost his job because of T-Bone's blackout, and now the Fixers are hunting the pair of them for revenge. T-Bone is in many ways responsible for pushing the already paranoid Tobias to abusing meds. We owe it to Tobias to fix this, and we want to see T-Bone succeed. That's a big green tick. Though he isn't quite as expressive as his Watch Dogs appearance, T-Bone still has a lot of personality where it counts.
Are you kidding me? I gotta call Frewer.
Yeah.
Are you kidding me?
What?
What indeed? What indeed?
And though Tobias might be slightly irritating at first, he gets a remarkable amount of character development. We see him go from a terrified paranoid who blames T-Bone for all his problems to someone willing to fight back against Default and Blom in a satisfying way. The epilogue cutscene they share at the end is shockingly sweet for a game that takes itself so seriously. Bad Blood delivers a highly enjoyable campaign. It's easily worth the money at a discount, but it doesn't stop there. What's next for Bad Blood is a truly impressive wealth of side content. The main attraction is Street Sweep. Still nothing dynamic sadly, but surprisingly challenging. Imagine gang hideouts with guaranteed reinforcements if you're detected, 2 targets for non-lethal takedowns, and about 100,000 guards standing in your way. The extra non-lethal target makes preparation and thinning the herd with hackables worthwhile for the first time. Since combat has such a high chance of killing the guy you had to whack, there's a lot of fun to be had with stakes this high, and Ubisoft clearly want you to test yourself, what with the flaunting of leaderboards. Oh, how I love constantly being reminded that some guy from Bhutan beat my Street Sweep score. You also get a sweet version of fixer contracts which require your car to stay above a certain speed. They're fairly tense, but the download Street Sweeps are fairly rubbish. The range-based download in no way separates this from a normal combat encounter. You can just kill everyone and then nab the files with no hassle. It's a good thing then that you don't have to do them all. Like with the trips, your incentive is outfits and a skill tree, though this is no alone. There's nothing even remotely interesting here. The value of the mode is a consistently enjoyable, fully replayable, endgame type side mission. I'll put my hands up and accept that these belong behind a loading screen. The last thing to check off on our to-do list is Bad Blood's investigations. The base game had these too, but they were typically just collectibles and a copy-paste side mission at the end. Incredible. Well, they're back, but Bad Blood makes them a hell of a lot more interesting. Fox Hunt was my favorite. It's always nice to see an expansion set after the base game deal with the fallout. A small-time hacker discovers the bunker she calls Blom. Blom finds where Aiden plans to stay for the time being and set loose their bounty hunters. You put a stop to that. They were gunning for Jackson's therapist and anyone living at Nikki's place too. Picking the hitman out from the crowd is a unique scenario, but I don't quite understand why you have to go non-lethal, given the fact that they can just try again. Yeah, that's an oversight, but there's a lot to love here. Aiden's ridiculously edgy voicemail.
Chances are you dialed this number by mistake. If so, hang up now. If you're trying to fly me, you're not going to. So hang up now. There won't be a beep.
And best of all, Aiden attempting to make banana bread.
Bring it down to 350 degrees Fahrenheit. With a wooden spoon. Mix your butter into the mashed bananas. Use a large mixing bowl. Next, mix in the sugar, honey, and vanilla. Lightly sprinkle in your baking soda. Mix vigorously. Add your flour. And mix. Pour your mix into a buttered loaf-shaped pan. Bake for 50 minutes. Cool for 10 minutes. Remember the most important step. Enjoy.
The other investigation is called the Council of Daves, focusing on the edgy hacker group DedSec and Clara, a member. You find an audio log recorded by Clara that explains that she's been working with a hacker who likes to wear a mask. He's a genius, but he can act childish, especially thanks to his anger issues. They're looking to find the bunker, but she's worried about what he'll do with it. She is, of course, talking about Default. Yeah, Default. Turns out she was working with him before Aiden. Further into the investigation, you find out that DedSec's leadership is turning up, well, dead. They're being targeted, all of them. The entire Council of Daves. I think the fact that the leaders of DedSec are all canonically called Dave is possibly the best thing to come out of Watch Dogs. It makes me wish Aiden worked with Chicago DedSec more often. And that is everything Bad Blood has to offer. Bad Blood is appropriately named. It's yet another victim of Ubisoft's mistakes, because no one played it and no one cared. But it has value. It's a great expansion to a solid base game, and if you enjoyed Watch Dogs or plan to revisit it, Bad Blood is easily worth a buy on sale. So, what's next for Watch Dogs? After 2014, some thought death of both the franchise and its memory. It didn't die. It persevered. And in 2020, we'll get to see what that was worth. But I feel like any move Watch Dogs makes is still tainted by the reputation of the first game. It hurts to watch. The sins of the father are not the sins of the son. Watch Dogs 2 caught flack before release and after, just because of the shared name. And Assassin's Creed suffers a similar curse. I remember how people talked about Origins as just another Ubisoft game, as if it was wholly derivative of its predecessors, which is not just false outright, but it proves people weren't even trying to be fair. Legion is trying to pull off something creative, something unique, something that for the first time in a AAA open-world title could create dynamic narrative investment in characters, and as such, create never-before-seen replayability. Should you pre-order? Only if you enjoy watching history repeat. Should you be hyped? Just control expectations. Should you give Legion as fair a chance as every other game? Yes. Watch Dogs is not doomed. It's been improving consistently since 2014, and I want to see it reach as far as it can. Thank you for watching. As always, if you'd like to help make these videos sustainable, Patreon donations are hugely appreciated and make projects on this scale way the hell easier to justify. Thank yous with the cherry on top go out to Lex Williams, Just Anima, Ludwig Salen, Leon Cuttendal, Holy Shift, Chance Tucker, Douglas Griffith, Combat Wombat, Sim, Noah B. Satterley, Thomas Landell, Juris Purins, Abby, L. Hudson, Rosa, Benjamin Carter, Bishop Nelson, John Lemley, Fabian Flack, Zachary Scott, Shade, Quarter Gamer, Captain Excellent, Noah Thorsager, Snazzy Mazzy, and Dominic Jaworski. I hope to see you next time. Goodbye.